People want to find their passion, but you don't find it, you create it. And you create it by getting good at something. And to get good at stuff, you start by doing something you suck at. Then you get good. Then you like it. Then people ask how you found your passion. Answer: by starting when you sucked and not giving up.
Yeah, I hate the passion mantra. I really do. I mean, part of it was because I'll even play it out. So I read all the same self-help books early on when I was, in my entrepreneurial days, and I was trying to find my passion, and I was into fitness. And so I was deciding between fitness, test prep, because I was good at test prep, and frozen yogurt, because I like dessert, right? So I've these are my 3 quote passions, which let's just translate that into things you're interested in. And so as soon as I started the gym, my passion disappeared. It became work. And I had a different mentor later in my life who said, never create work around your passion, because then it'll become work. And he was a guy who's a very successful business guy. And I think about that actually more than I'd share, because it's just complete and utter, because it assumes that what you're going to be doing every day is the thing that you're currently really interested, which also doesn't make you money. And so your behavior has to change. And whenever you're doing these new things, one, they'll be new, which means you will suck at them, which means you'll probably not like them. But it's also part of it. And so I would prefer to take the extreme opposite position of everything will suck. And eventually you will get good at the things that you suck at. And then you'll enjoy being competent at that thing, which will then probably give you status, and you'll enjoy the fruits of status more than the pain of doing the thing. And in so doing, create a positive feedback loop that you'll actually keep sticking with it. And so I'd rather set the expectation that everything is terrible all the time, forever. Now let's see if we can become the person who can still do it anyways, and start that as the baseline, rather than trying to assume that I need perfect conditions in order to start. Because, starting is the perfect condition. Whatever condition that you're in, that you start, was the perfect condition.
There is such a thing as intrinsic motivation, though, as well as extrinsic. You can do something, there's a whole myriad of things that you could be potentially good at. And many of them could give you renown and money and social clout and that feedback loop. But there are some that you will enjoy doing for the sake of doing them more. Mm-hmm. I don't disagree. I remember a note that I wrote to myself when I first started the podcast, and I decided to turn pro with it, mm-hmm. which is, one way to turn something you love into a labor is to monetize it.
Okay.
Because as soon as you decide that you're going to really, really go for this, if you want to turn pro at something, I use this example in my live show of a pickleball player. Mm-hmm. So this guy loves playing pickleball, and he gets to turn up on a Saturday and play with his friends. Yeah. And, if it's cold outside, he doesn't need to go and play. And if he's tired, he doesn't need to go and play. And if he's hungover, he doesn't need to go and play. And then he decides to turn pro. And he thinks, I'm turning pro at this thing that I love. I can't wait to make what I love into my career. But he doesn't realize that, hey, guess what? If you're hungover, you still need to go and train. Yeah. Well, actually, no, you don't get to be hungover anymore, because the guy that isn't hungover is the guy that's training better. So you now need to stop going out with your friends, and you need to train when it's cold, and you need to work on game tape and mindset and hydration and nutrition. You need to do S&C, and you need to have a physio, and you need to not see your family as much. All of these things came along for the ride as soon as you decided to turn pro. Is that a price that you're prepared to pay? And that's an interesting question to ask yourself. Yeah. Am I prepared to sacrifice my pure, unencumbered, unmolested love for this thing in order to try and become the best at this thing?
I think it's really tough, and I'm gonna shoot my own advice right now in the head, or at least my positioning right now, which is that it's very easy for someone in my position or in your position to say, this is kind of what it takes. Or rather, this is you should find your passion. Because transparently, what I do now every day, I actually really do love. I live more or less the same day, 7 days a week. And I'll tell you what it is just so we can have context. But I wake up and then I go to my office here and I work for 6 hours writing my next book. And then I take 2 hours-ish of calls typically. And then after that, I lift in the gym that I custom designed with all the pieces that I love. And then I go and eat with my wife. And then I go to my condo and I sit in my recliner that overlooks the entire city and I read. And then I go to bed. And I do that every day. And I love every aspect of the day with the exception of maybe the 2 hours of calls that I have to take. But I see those as a necessary thing for everything else that I have there. Now, could I stop doing that? Maybe. But for me to say that that's what your day needs to look like in order to get into the top floor with the view that looks over these things, and so that you can not make money for 2 years while you write a book that eventually makes money or whatever, is not true. And so it's the difference between like, oh, I should fly private because that's what rich people do. I should play basketball because I want to be tall, and modeling the behavior at the top of the mountain rather than the climb. And so they're completely different. And so this whole idea, unfortunately, and I don't blame the people who do this, is they see their current life, like I would see mine, and say, well, what do I do now? I do everything that I love. Okay. But I didn't get here doing everything that I love. I did what I hate. And I did it for a very long period of time. And I did not have anyone to root me on. And in fact, I had many people who were actively trying to destroy my path and tell me why it was a terrible idea.
I had this idea about why you should stop taking advice from successful people, because most of their advice is not about what they did when they were at your stage. It's about what they do now.
Right.
And it's the same thing around pushing work-life balance. You know, what I've found after 50 years at Disney is that really the most important thing is all right, well, how did you get to this stage? What did you do when you were 2 years in? Because that's where I am.
Yeah.
What did you do when you were broken living on the gym floor? Because that's where I am. Don't tell me about the complicated routine or the balance or the flying private. The bar stool's upside down and you're mixing up the ends for the means.
Everything on my ride up. So this is, I mean, I remember in a lot of excruciating detail what it took me to get here. But I will say that I had a ruthless focus on dollars per hour. And so, and I'm just giving tactical advice right now, but everything that I could trade away for more time doing the thing that made me money was what I did. And so I remember the first time I made a $500 sale, and it took me 30 minutes. And I was like, every hour of every day, this is what I'm going to do. And anything that is not talking to someone in exchange for them giving me a credit card so that I can charge it and make $500, anything that makes me less than $250 per hour or per 30 minutes, I'm giving to somebody else. And so after that first sale, I was like, I'm never cooking again. I'm never going grocery shopping again. I'm not cleaning again, because I knew that in one sale, I could pay for that person for the month. And so like the ruthless focus on what can I do that creates an input to output being money equation. And me, at least for me, it was pouring everything I possibly could into the input and eliminating everything else. I made this video on Facebook before I was, quote, Alex Hormozi, years ago, when I still had 6 gyms, before I even did the turnarounds. And I made this video almost as documentation, but I said, so I want to open up my 7th, 8th, 9th, and 10th location, and I have the spots picked out. And I'm already working all of the hours that I'm awake, and I've already given up Saturdays. So the only thing that I have left is like Sundays and evenings. And so I am no longer going to be watching any football, and I'm no longer going to have Netflix at all. And that is what I'm giving up for 7, 8, 9, and 10. And I remember just making this video of like, that's what I'm sacrificing. And I think a lot of people create these to-do lists when, in my experience, it's been so much more useful to write down all the things that I'm willing to sacrifice. Because if you sacrifice everything, there's nothing left than to do the one thing that matters. And I think Jerry Seinfeld talks about this from a writing perspective. He says that every day, no matter what, he sits down and he writes for 2 hours. Now, he doesn't have to write, but he's not allowed to do anything else. And so he can sit there, but there's nothing else to do except for write jokes. And so I think a lot about that from the climb perspective, which is like most of everyone who's listening to this who isn't achieving what they want is with their time. They think that they're spending all their time working, but your output, like you don't even know how to work. I'm being really real with you. Like you think you know how to work, you don't know how to work. Like the amount of output, like, and I'll measure this by like, what is your output? It's probably not as high as you think. And so rather than trying to learn all these productivity hacks, the ultimate productivity hack is no. N-O. because you stop doing. And then when you create space, then you can fill it with the thing that matters. But trying to add on more to your schedule of all the things that you're not willing to sacrifice is the very reason that you're not doing what you need to do.
A lot of people would look at that life of, I'm going to sacrifice evenings and I'm not going to watch football anymore, and say, well, what's the point? If you make yourself miserable en route to achieving the goal,
Totally.
if most of your life is journey, not destination, and it makes you miserable en route to it, why do that?
So that was the thing I was mentioning earlier, where it's like, let's take the absolute extreme of it's going to suck and it's going to last forever. How can I be okay in that circumstance? And I do have the fundamental belief that circumstance has nothing to do with what your subjective well-being is. And so if monks can be super chill in wherever monks do monk things and have nothing and have higher subjective well-being ratings than anyone else here in the Western world, it clearly isn't external. And so then if I'm going to be just as miserable being mediocre as I am doing this that's going to amount to something, then I might as well do the that's going to amount to something and be miserable there and at least have something to show for it.
There's this story I learned about Victor Hugo, famous writer from history. Do you know this about what he did with his servant?
Mm-mm.
So Victor Hugo needed to make himself right. So he paid his servant each night during the middle of the night to come into his bedroom and remove the bedclothes from him, turn the heating off, and then lock his bedroom door from the outside. And he wasn't allowed to leave until Victor slid 6 pages of handwritten work underneath. So, you know, you look at Opal, which is this app for iPhone, which stops you from using apps, or Frozen Turkey, Cold Turkey, which is the same thing for desktop. And that's just the digital equivalent of Victor Hugo being locked in his bedroom with no bedding and just a quill and a few pieces of paper, and then having to slide it underneath the door.
And I want to push back on something that you said right before Victor Hugo, which is, you know, somebody might ask, like, why would you do all this stuff if you're not happy? That assumes that my goal in life is to be happy.
What is your goal in life?
To do epic, genuinely, to be useful. And so,
why place do epic over be happy?
Because when I look back on my life in retrospect, the things that bring me the most joy in the moment are the things that I was willing to sacrifice for an extended period of time. And those pay memory dividends far greater than the momentary cost that I had in the moment. And so I think it's a long-term, short-term thing, but a frame that continued to paralyze me for a long period of time was an obsession with happiness. Like, it was truly an obsession. It was an obsession of mine in college. I almost got into positive psychology because I thought that was really interesting. And that's my passion, right? I consumed all that stuff and I drove myself mad with it. And I actually was more sad and depressed than anything, which is probably why I was trying to find all this positive, hippy dippy stuff. And I just cracked one day and I was like, happiness, because it felt so out of reach that I was like, just fuck it. I'm not even going to shoot for it. I'm just going to do stuff. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to do stuff. And what happened was, like, a few years later, a few years later, I looked up and I was like, I'm not miserable. And so I actually identified for a very long period of time as, I'm not a happy person, and that's okay. I'm fine with that. I accept that. And there was this huge conflict for such a long period of time where I was like, you're supposed to be happy. Why aren't you happier? Like, there's something wrong. There's something wrong with you. Something needs to change. Rather than saying, like, maybe the level of happy that you are is fine. Who am I? Like, what happy am I comparing myself to? And also, if whatever your current state is, if you just say, like, happier, which is really when people are like, I want to be happy, they're just saying, I want to be happier than I am, which means that you create this distance between where you are and where you want to be, which is the recipe for being unhappy, is saying that I want to be happier. So it doesn't matter how happy you are, you want to be happier. And so by relinquishing the desire to be happy, I ended up enjoying a lot more of the stuff that I was doing because I didn't make it a requisite for my activities. So then it became a pleasant surprise. I was like, oh, this doesn't suck. How nice.
two famous psychologists, Daniel Gilbert and Daniel Kahneman, have quite divergent views on happiness. Okay. It's quite interesting. So Daniel Gilbert talks about how if you spent every minute of the rest of your life on a floaty lilo in a pool drinking cocktails, in retrospect, you might not have found much meaning, but each individual moment of experience would have been enjoyable, and he believes that constitutes to him a life that is well lived.
I disagree with this guy entirely.
Daniel Kahneman, and this is my position too, which is a well-lived life is one which in retrospect you are glad that you lived, right? So one is leaning toward hedonic pleasure and the other is leaning toward meaning. So one you could say is happiness and the other is meaning. It's my belief that your disposition largely influences where on that spectrum from lilo to do hard things you need to sit. And you will have friends, and I did for a very long time in the nightlife industry, have friends that just seem to be so happy not doing stuff. Like just they would float through life and they wouldn't ask themselves, am I actualizing my virtue? Is this the highest integrity that I can do with these things and all the rest of it? And I was envious of those people. You ever seen a dog? You see a dog on the floor and it's just lying there and you think, oh my God, if only I could be that dog. Like it just wants to go for a walk and have food and like go pee-pee. That's it. That's all it wants to do. And you think it would be great to be that dog. But like, guess what? If your constitution doesn't allow you to be that dog, the only way out is through. And this was something, the first time that I went to go and see Peterson, someone asked him a question and they said, the depth of my consciousness causes me to suffer. Is it a blessing or a curse to feel everything so deeply? And he thought for a little bit and he said, take more of the thing that poisons you until you turn it into a tonic that girdles the world around you. The only way out is through. And it's kind of like, as soon as you realize that there are things that you do that give you satisfaction and there are things that other people do that give them happiness, and you've tried that route, the only way is to continue doing the thing that you know that works. And I think that you were an example of someone who is optimizing heavily for meaning rather than for hedonism. And that's not to say that there are people, and this is, I said this on the last episode, the fundamental thing that people don't understand, as far as I can tell, about your worldview is that the thing that you do for work and the thing that you do for fun are the same thing. They can't imagine that because that's not the way that it is for them. And it's not maybe the way it is for most people. But if you're the sort of person that finds meaning more enjoyable than happiness, you need to optimize for the thing that you enjoy the most.
And I'll toss in, and meaning lasts longer. And so I'll be super upfront. If those friends of yours in the nightlife, there's nothing wrong with that in my way, like as I see the world. Like if that's you and you're like, I fucking love everything I do, then like you won. Like just keep doing that. You know what I mean? But I think a lot of the message that Chris and I are saying here is that if you've tried that path and it hasn't worked for you, then you have this dark door that's in the corner that you've been trying all the other ones that have nice gold edges and really shiny things, but there's that door that you keep looking at, and it's the other side of you that's clearing his throat in the other room, and it's like you just have to bust through the door. And I think that giving yourself permission to be unhappy, or at least for me, giving myself permission to be unhappy for an extended period of time in order to get what I wanted, gave me so much relief from, honestly, I don't like using the word nowadays because it has so many associations, but just from like the depression or the funk that I was in for a few years.
Right?
Yeah, I just didn't like my life, and I had achieved by most measures because I don't have the school failed me. I was a whatever. Like I wasn't that. I finished in 3 years and I did really well in school and I had a really good job, but it was empty for me, and so my goal is things we talked about earlier, but my personal goal is to squeeze every ounce of potential out of whatever I have. And I think that if you feel like you have potential left over, then it will eat you alive until you do something about it.